Lecture 8, Development. A common and confusing way of classifying countries is by labeling them Third World, Second World, or First World. This manner of classification is confusing because it is out of date. The terminology has its origins in the Cold War, which lasted from around 1946 and ended in 1991, between the USA and its allies and the USSR and its allies. At that time, the First World was the US, the UK, and their allies, and the Second World was the Soviet Union, China, and their allies. The Third World referred to neutral or non-aligned countries. Currently, the term Third World is now used to categorize any country that is considered very poor and undeveloped in relation to other countries. Similarly, the term First World is used to categorize any country that is considered wealthy and highly developed. The term Second World, not surprisingly, is rarely used today. Another way, and less confusing at least for me, of classifying countries is by labeling them least economically developed countries, less economically developing countries, and most economically developing countries. Note well that there are several variations on this type of ordering countries with respect to economic development. For example, a so-called developing country is typically considered a country that is not highly developed economically when compared to other countries. In my mind, though, this is confusing since it implies that only wealthy countries are developed countries. However, once a country stops developing its economic potential, it will inevitably decline and regress to become a less developed country. Imagine if a factory told its workers that we're so fully developed as a company, we no longer need to work. This would mean the end of their business. I prefer, therefore, to label countries with high economic development as the most economically developing countries and not simply developed countries. Notice in the classification that I propose, the adjective economic is used. This adjective is often not used. Instead, countries are typically categorized with respect to economics as least developed, less developed, and developed. I find this problematic as well, since it implies that what defines a country's development is its economic factors. However, are there other types of development that not only may be equally important, but also at times may be more important? Is it possible for a country to have a high level of human, cultural, and religious development, but not be as economically advanced as countries that are most economically developed? Could the reverse be the case as well? When development is broadly understood as encompassing economic, political, human, cultural, and religious development, then classification of countries becomes much more difficult. Nonetheless, thinking of development broadly can be helpful. Even when development is restricted to economics, it can only be done abstractly. For a country to develop economically, political development is needed, especially when a country is one of the least economically developed countries. Political development includes unifying the population. This form of political development is called nation building. Political development also entails instituting or reforming current governmental structures. This is commonly referred to as state building. To develop or not to develop, that is the question. Often when development is used to classify countries, it is assumed the more developed a country is, especially economically, the better it is. Is this the case, though? Is it possible for a country to be overdeveloped? I believe it is. In our post-industrial age, we are aware of the problems associated with economic development gone awry. Some signs that indicate a country has imprudently overdeveloped itself economically include pollution, acid rain, urban loneliness, a high suicide rate, and drug addiction. Can you think of others? One concrete case that can be interpreted as a specific effect of overdevelopment is the well-publicized murder of Catherine Susan Kitty Genovese on March 13, 1964, outside of an apartment complex in Queens, New York City, one of the most economically developed cities in the world. Despite repeatedly crying for help while she was being stabbed to death, not a single neighbor, even though they either saw her through their window or heard her cries, intervened or called the police. This terrifying case of inhuman coldness to the plight of someone in distress led some to propose that those who were aware of Kitty Genevieve's need for help and did nothing were suffering from a bystander effect, due to the diffusion of responsibility that people feel in a large industrialized city. The details of this tragic incident include the following. After completing her work early in the morning as a bar manager, Kitty drove back to her home, parked her car, and began walking the short distance of around 100 feet to her apartment's door. A man named Winston Moseley approached her in a threatening manner. Reacting, Kitty ran in front of her building. Moseley in turn ran after and upon reaching her, stabbed her twice in the back. Kitty screamed as she was stabbed. Although her screams were heard by several neighbors, no one intervened in an effective way or, according to some reports, even called the police. After stabbing Kitty, Moseley left her. However, he then shortly returned to the site where he stabbed her, looked for her, and upon finding her, stabbed her a few more times. Finally, he raped her and stole her money. Only after Moseley had stabbed her twice, left, searched for her, stabbed her again, raped her, stolen her money, and left did a neighbor call the police. Upon investigating, police determined that around a dozen neighbors had either seen or heard the attack, and yet these neighbors did little to help Kitty. Do you think the above case illustrates the danger of overdeveloping economic resources while not developing humanly, culturally, and religiously? Why or why not? It can be reasonably argued that the bystander effect can occur anywhere. However, this phenomena is, I think, less likely to occur when people see their neighbors more like extended family and less like quasi-anonymous people they just happen to live next to. For example, if everyone in the apartment building saw Kitty like they would their daughter, perhaps the outcome would have been different. But for this to occur, human development where people become more relational and aware that they're part of a caring community needs to take place. Development and population. One common opinion is that population growth reduces the likelihood that more people will share in the benefits of development. Can this opinion be reasonably challenged? Stephen Mosher of Population Research believes it can be. He argues that although population is growing, this growth as recorded by the UN is slowing more and more. Eventually, if the slowness trend continues, growth will stop around 8 billion by 2045 and then begin declining faster and faster. In addition, he argues, population cannot be blamed for poverty, hunger, and other related issues, since these issues have been present throughout history. An important difference, though, is that since we have more people, these problems are affecting more people, but not necessarily more as a percentage of the total world population. Even if the population grew to 10 billion, currently around 7 billion, is it possible for every person in the world to have sufficient food to eat? The problem is not with how many people are living the world, but rather is with greed. There could be 1 million people living in the world and still be great hunger if a minority of the people hoard and waste precious resources. A team of international experts, coordinated by Jonathan A. Foley, proposed 5 steps that, and I quote, if pursued together could raise by more than 100% the food available for human consumption globally while significantly lessening greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity losses, water use, and water pollution. Tackling the triple challenge will be one of the most important tests humanity has ever faced. It is fair to say that a response will determine the fate of our civilization. End of quote. The 5 goals include preventing agriculture from consuming more tropical land, boosting the productivity of farms that have the lowest yields, raising the efficiency of water and fertilizer use worldwide, reducing per capita meat consumption, and reducing waste in food production and distribution. Colonialism, nation building, and state building. Colonialism, by which powerful countries establish presence in other lands and rule them, had both positive and negative features. At the turn of the 20th century, Britain, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Holland, Portugal, Belgium, and the Ottoman Empire, now reduced to Turkey, all had overseas colonial empires. Some of the positive features that colonialism brought, or are easier to interpret as being positive, are the political and economic infrastructures that were built and the schools that were established. Another positive feature that followed the wake of colonialism was the introduction of Christianity, especially by saints who respected and deeply loved the natives and also defended the natives from abuse. Negative features include the disruption of traditional cultures, the abuse of natives at the hand of colonists, and the introduction of European diseases which devastated some native people. When the colonies gained their independence from the dominant European powers in the 20th century, a number of problems faced them that are traceable, at least in part, to how the European colonists created states. States were created by the colonists without taking into consideration religious, tribal, or ethnic differences that had established boundaries. These boundaries at times were hundreds, if not thousands of years old. Due to the artificial origin of these modern states, many of them have been prone to civil strife, resulting in repeated coups, revolutions, and sometimes genocide. Reflection upon the recent unfortunate history of former colonies has produced a number of theories on how to build a nation-state. If a people living in a designated land do not identify with each other as a nation, there is usually a greater risk that civil strife will occur than in lands that have a strong national identity. One way to forge a common national identity among a people of different ethnic groups is promoting common symbols, such as flags and anthems. Other ways include affirming a common religious dimensions, such as Judeo-Christian ethics, instituting national holidays, such building national stadiums, encouraging or mandating the use of a national language, and teaching national myths. Along with building a national identity that at times can seem impossible in certain states, the very practical aspects of state building are also of utmost importance when developing a harmonious nation-state. State building is principally defined by creating, instituting, and building key political and economic institutions or infrastructure. These include constitutions, legal codes, courts, public services, governmental buildings, roads, bridges, means of communication, a practical way of imposing and collecting taxes, and ways for including participation in the political process. The last one, including people in the political process, can be risky when a nation is newly emerging, since active participation might not lead to unification, but rather may encourage further argumentation and fragmentation. In countries that are not very economically advanced and which want to forge a strong national identity, it might be wise to encourage basic development, and then after a middle class is firmly established, to ease up political control by allowing greater participation in the political process. What is your opinion? Should the encouragement of democratic participation always precede any other type of development? Failed or fragile states. Some states never seem capable of developing nor seem capable of justly meeting the needs of their citizens in even basic ways. States that are viewed as falling into this category include Congo, Sudan, South Sudan, Chad, Yemen, Central African Republic, Haiti, Somalia, Afghanistan, Sierra Leone, and Zimbabwe. A few notable features of these countries include the following. Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. Sierra Leone's Revolutionary United Front kidnaps boys and girls and then trains them as child soldiers and or turns them into sex slaves. Sierra Leone has been listed by the UN as the least livable country in the world, and Somalia has been plagued by hunger, civil war among clans, and is feared for its pirates who capture ships and hold people for ransom. God bless.